conservative, constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And welcome everybody to another amazing day right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Nationally, we have been seeing a talk about the budget and a fight going on, of course. Obviously, some things have passed the House, and the issue by the time you listen to this might be completely resolved as well, passed through the Senate, signed by Joe Biden, et cetera, et cetera. However, I want to take this moment to talk about what that fight really is about, because it relates to, of course, the budgeting that occurs right here in Kentucky, to lead to why you may see some Kentucky representatives like Thomas Massie and Rand Paul voting against something that otherwise Trump seems to be for. What exactly is the philosophical fight going on there? We'll dig into that. We'll be digging into a police body cam footage regarding a homeless woman who was in labor. She later gave birth to the baby, but was in labor and was cited by the police. And the media says this guy is just awful, horrible. General consensus is that he's awful, horrible person. We'll take a look at the body cam footage and then also go through exactly what we're seeing. So we're going to have all that and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Before I dig down into it, please make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe. If you're listening to this on a social media platform, make sure you are following the page. You can share this out with others. If you're listening to this radio or TV, you can head over to theandrewshow.com to see all the other places where you can listen to the other episodes of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Of course, if you're listening to this on the podcast format, make sure you leave a review and you're following the show if you're not. But without further ado, why don't we dig down into it here? So, we're seeing this argument regarding the budget. And let me kind of explain what some of the pushback going on here is. You see, the Republicans, a good chunk of them, are taking big issue with a few things that the House leadership, and also too, as well, Trump wants to get done. But the main thing Trump wants to get done right now is to lift the debt ceiling for some time. And there's a reason why. We'll kind of talk about why he wants to see that and some conversation about the debt ceiling. But here we are, trying to fund the government last minute again, trying to avoid a shutdown. They're trying to push forward an omnibus bill. Basically a big bill that funds everything instead of dividing it out into little portions. Now remember here, I think back in September, when we passed the last continuing resolution, Johnson had said that this wouldn't happen again, but yet it happened again. And what is occurring, what the arguments are, what the systematic change that you're seeing Republicans trying to make, some Republicans trying to make, is to deal with the omnibus spending bills that the uniparty, Republicans and Democrats, use in order to try and, force legislators to vote for what is a pile of manure because there's a few daisies growing out of it. What people like Thomas Massie and Rand Paul want to see happen with our federal government is to see them divide off these big bills into separate individual bills so they can choose to fund different departments, what levels to fund, what they don't want to fund. But instead, they shove it all into one, and then they'll throw daisies on top of this pile of manure, such as in this case, disaster relief. So if that way you don't vote for the pile of manure, they can sit there and say, well, what, you don't want to help people out with disaster relief? It would be kind of like, imagine in your own household, you want to buy a new vehicle, and you say, well, look, we'll pay the water bill if I get to buy a new vehicle. And your wife turns around to you, if you're a man, your wife, if you're a woman, your husband, turns around to you and says, you're not buying a new vehicle. And your response to that is to say, oh, so you don't want to pay the water bill, huh? That's kind of the same thing that goes on here. They're trying to package together things that aren't necessary with things that are in order to force Republicans to vote for it. I mean, we saw this taking place here in Kentucky because Kentucky also passes these kinds of omnibus spending packages, just a few bills every 2 years to fund our government here in Kentucky, and they pass them all at once. And what you'll see many a times is increased spending and everything else. Now, right now, nationally, the Republicans and even the more punditry class that's trying to be reasonable will tell you, look, this is how the sausage gets made. An allegory, of course, pointing to the fact that people don't like to see sausage made, but they enjoy the final product. But the problem is we don't like the final product that we're getting. Or they'll say, look, we would love to be more conservative, better spending Republicans, but those mean old Democrats are just stopping us. So we need to be realistic with what's going on here. Come on, guys, you don't want to lose control of the House here in 2 years, right? We got to get together here. So that would stand to reason then. If what's standing in the way is they just got to make deals with Democrats and they're just trying to hold on to control, then that would stand to reason that if you were in a body that had an 80% Republican majority legislators, a veto-proof majority, that then, of course, Republicans would be spending a lot less. However, when we look at Kentucky, we don't see that, because you see here in Kentucky, we do have an 80% Republican majority. And when we see their behaviors, we're able to actually pick apart this argument going on nationally, saying, look, Republicans can't be Republican right now. There's too many Democrats that we have to deal with. Because let's look at here what goes on in our state with the budget as far as it goes. So every even-numbered years, we make a budget here in the state that funds the next 2 years. And the last time Democrats had control of the House was in 2016. In 2017, the elections of 2016 led to Republicans having a majority, and now they have 80 out of 100 seats in the House, and they have, 31 out of 38 or 30 out of 38 of the seats in the Senate. Vast, vast majority. In fact, they overcome Beshear's vetoes, because Beshear does veto parts of the spending bill every single time they put it out there, and they've overcome them every time without discussion. So the idea that we have to deal with Democrats is frankly not true. So if we're not dealing with Democrats anymore, you would certainly expect to see a deduction in spending, right? Well, thankfully, we do have the ability to look back at 2016. So in 2016, Democrats had a slim majority in our state House, and Republicans had control of the Senate. And of course, they also had control of the governorship there with Bevin. So when we look at the budget that was passed then, we see that the average 2 years, so I just took both years and divided it, the average budget there was $34,429,114,200, which adjusted for inflation is $45,257,484,060.88. So basically about $45.2 billion, if we're comparing apples to apples, was what the budget was then. So what do we think the Republicans in Kentucky have done now? I mean, let's keep in mind that they say nationally that it's not that we're bad Republicans, we're just trying to govern. You hear that all the time. We're just trying to govern. You don't get it. This is just what has to happen. So then when you move into a state where they have the majority, where that's not a concern, where Republicans are voted in on small government principles, you would expect to see a decrease in spending, of course, but that isn't what happened. Just how much more has our Republican majority spent? Well, you're going to have to wait till after this break when I go over that, and I'll go over just real quick, the debt limit talk as well. We'll have that after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. If you want to reach out to the show, feel free to email info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. We'll be back in a few short minutes. And you are back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Before the break, we're taking a look at the state budgeting. So when Democrats had control of the House, now Republicans had control of the Senate and the governor's office, of course, the average yearly budget for Kentucky was $45.2 billion. Now, we're seeing nationally, of course, this conversation going on regarding Republicans just can't be as Republican as they'd like to be because they have to negotiate with the Democrats. So then when Republicans get power, well, you would assume then in a state like Kentucky, we'd see a massive drop. So what was the average budget that they just passed here in 2024 per year? It was $64.2 billion. That is an adjusted for inflation increase of spending since Democrats no longer became a part of our spending conversation in Kentucky. That is 41.8% adjusted for inflation. So clearly the problem isn't we got to make sausage here. The problem isn't we got to cut deals in order to get it done. You don't like what you like the sausage, but you don't like to see how it happens. Well, I don't like this sausage. This sausage is 41.8% more in spending. And you'll see Republicans try to play this off by saying, well, so what? We're fiscally sound. In fact, they say that every time the Republicans in Kentucky pass a new budget, they say this is the most conservative budget we've ever passed. It's like clockwork. Here in 2026, when they pass the next budget, you'll hear the same darn thing. They will say, this is the most conservative budget ever, despite the fact they're ignoring that they took over the budget from the Democrats and have since spent 41.8% more adjusted for inflation. So you ask yourself, why does this keep happening? Why does it not matter that whether Democrats are in power or Republicans, the state grows and they spend more money? And of course, too, just to rewind here, Republicans will say, we're cutting taxes and we believe in smaller government. But I ask you this, how are you cutting taxes if the state has more money? I mean, in that amount of time, our population only grew 2 to 3% or so, about 100,000 people. They'll say, look at our income tax cuts. We did that for you. And granted, I could go into the math, and I have on this show, about how they ended up actually increasing the overall tax burdens on Kentuckians, but you don't need to know the numbers. All you need to know is the government is spending 41.8% more than they were in 2016. That's all you need to know. Because if you believe in smaller government and less spending and less taxation, or even not less spending, if you just believe in smaller government and less taxation, that doesn't equal more spending. Because if the government is spending more, that means it has to be doing more. These are basic concepts. You don't need to have a PhD in economics to know this. And if population hasn't gone up 41.8% and the state has more money, when adjusted for inflation has more money, that means you must be paying more in taxes. The citizenry as a whole is paying more in taxes. One way, one how, whether it's through licensing fees or through sales taxing on more individual items or whatever it may be, unless the quote-unquote tax base grew by 41.8%, which it didn't, then you have to be paying more. So even if we're just maintaining, if we're saying, look, we haven't grown government, it's doing the same things it's always done. Okay, then what are you spending the other 41.8% on then? And where's that money coming from if not our pockets somehow, some way? So the question becomes, why do they do this? Why do they fight so hard? I mean, we saw them fight so hard federally to try to get Republicans to vote for this CR, omnibus spending. Why is it that they don't just separate it out? I mean, you're seeing a growing cadre of Republicans when it comes to spending bills saying, pass individual budget bills. And you see calls for that here too in Kentucky. And it has to do with a push and pull of control. It's kind of like I guess you'd call it a Mexican standoff of sorts, right? So here's the symbiotic relationship that goes on within I guess you'd call it kind of parasitic type relationship that goes on within leadership and how they maintain power. You see, those in power, the Speaker of the Federal House or the Speaker of the State House, the President of the Senate here in Kentucky, the whip, the majority, all these people, how do they keep control on this body? And it's simply put, it's through money. We see, that's why the federal Senate actually keeps a better control, generally speaking, on their people and how they vote. You'll notice a lot less dissent out of the federal Senate, and you'll see that too in the state Senate as well, because simply put, those seats cost more money in order to get. And so in order to get that money, you got to bring it in from donors. Compared to Congress, especially if you're currently in office and if it's a pretty solid red seat and you've made a good name for yourself there, you can win the primaries pretty easily because other people have to come up with millions to beat you. And maybe you just need to raise $1 million or so, and you can generally raise that from the general citizenry. But when it comes to the Senate and when you've got to spend $20 million in order to maintain your seat every 6 years, well, you're going to do things in order to get that money. And that is what the leadership does. What they do is they raise money into these caucus campaign accounts. They do at the state level, do it at the federal level. And then they dole that money out to individuals to help them win re-election as long as they do what they're told. But in order to bring that money in to give leadership control, they have to deliver for the donors, aka the investors, who are giving them that money. And that requires pork-filled omnibus bills that are redirecting private dollars into, taxpayer dollars into certain industries and certain groups and certain interest groups as pockets. That's what happens. But they need you to vote for it. But, of course, they need a little bit of assurance that if you don't vote for it, well, they can attack you for it. So if they split the bills off and took the flowers out of the manure and let people just pass the flowers, well, what would end up happening is nobody would vote for the manure. You would be applauded for passing the flowers, but you'd only be attacked for passing the manure. So instead, they put it all together to force these legislators to go ahead and vote for all of it. And if they don't, they can be attacked for it. Because if you don't vote for it, well, what will happen is they'll threaten you, and sometimes they follow through with funding a primary opponent against you. And then you go ahead and face that down. But while they're attacking you, they will attack you for not voting for that spending bill. I'll give you an example. So I just talked about how it's a 41.8% increase in spending on this most recent budget bill here in Kentucky. Well, you did have some legislators, for example, such as Savannah Maddox, that voted no on that spending legislation. You had a few of them vote no on that spending legislation. So what was in that spending, outside of a lot of useless projects, was some other good things like body armor for police officers. So when it came time for election season this past time during the primary, those who would seek to control what goes on in the House and Senate went ahead and attacked those members who voted no on the Kentucky budget, saying that they didn't want police officers to have body armor. And they're relying on you to not know what's going on and not be paying attention and to not know the manure that's in the bill. So that way, when they tell you about the flowers that this person didn't vote for, you think less of them. It's all just kind of a way to keep that power. And how do we fix this? Well, we fix it by enough legislators standing up, and there's growing more and more that say we will not vote for omnibus spending, period. If it is not separated out spending bills, we're not voting for it, and we need to see the same thing in the state. If that happened, then the legislators in our state house and in our federal legislature could grab back power from the leadership and actually begin to represent their constituents. Because how is it fair that one state, if it's a Senate leader, or one congressional district that has the same amount of people as all the others, their representative has more control and power because, well, they were elected speaker? That isn't representing the people. That's putting certain people in positions to make them essentially a tyrant, a dictator over what the rest of the supposed representatory body is supposed to be doing. Now, there's another part of the federal fight that I do want to talk about real quick that deals with the increasing of the debt limit. Now, that was Trump's big thing. He didn't want to see a fight over the debt limit when he came in. Part of it has to do with that he's concerned that if he wants to make tax cuts or other things, he'll run up against the debt limit and he'll be unable to do so. He won't be able to get his priorities done because what Trump is going to attempt to do is increase revenues and then have some cuts probably around the edges. I mean, he's not going to probably substantially cut the government too much. He could cut regulation, though, and also issue tax cuts, which could jog the economy and make America's financial lows less, but without some extreme cuts to certainly at least a welfare state. I'm talking not about Social Security there. I'm talking about things like Medicare, Medicaid, and as such, not Medicare, Medicaid, and, the welfare programs. Without substantial cuts there, it's going to be hard to see how the country comes out of their spending cycle as we see debt payments now quickly becoming the largest part of our budget. So Trump doesn't want the argument over the debt limit. Now, there's an interesting point. The debt limit argument came up during Biden, and at time Biden said that he would just go ahead and raise the debt limit Anyways, and this is an interesting conversation because I do see people like Rand Paul and Thomas Massey's point of saying we need to vote on the debt limit because it's a reminder to us that we're spending so much, and we need to, every time if we max out the credit card, we need to have a conversation about lowering the costs, and having to decide to take out another credit card forces us to have that conversation. On the other side of things, it's kind of weird that we basically double vote on our appropriations bill, because we vote for it once when they decide to fund the government, and then they vote for it again when they have to raise the debt ceiling to pay for what they already voted for the spending on. That is interesting point of conversation. Now, if Republicans could properly use those opportunities to drive down spending, it could be great. Because I think people naturally understand, like, hey, raising the debt limit, pulling out another credit card because you've maxed out yours, doing that constantly as a country isn't a good thing. It could give you a good win. But of course, those in leadership don't want to have that conversation, don't want to talk about that, because they rely, once again, on those handouts that they get from increasing that debt limit in order to maintain their positions in office. And you're back here on this final segment of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So recently, this past session, the Republicans passed a bill to make camping, quote unquote, public camping, basically unlawful camping, illegal. That there would be designated areas where homeless people could set up and camp, or of course they can go to shelters or other places. And, that being just on private property where you're not invited, or taking up public spaces where other people aren't able to enjoy them, breaking the law in other ways, that would no longer be allowed. And it was done specifically to deal with situations like we're going to see right here. However, what we're going to see here is body cam footage of a police officer issuing a citation for somebody public camping, pulling up on a pregnant woman, and he detains her and issues her a citation, and then later on she actually gives birth to a child later that day. And people are really upset at this officer, and it's because the media sucks. So I'm going to play for you the video, and it's important that you understand where I got this video from, because this is the 1-minute cut that was given to me that I pulled from the Courier Journal article on this particular instance. Let's go ahead and take a watch or listen to that.
I'm waiting for an ambulance. I'm gonna keep going in the labor. Is that okay?
You said you need an ambulance?
Yeah, I need an ambulance.
Did you call for one? The 104 to radio. Just please update my location.
I hate my life so much.
Please start
about
EMS this way. I've got a lady here that says she's going into labor. Ma'am, you need to stop. Stop.
Am I being detained?
Yes, you're being detained.
What?
You're being detained because you're unlawfully camping. How far along are you? They're asking for EMS.
I'm due October 29th.
I'm issuing you a citation for unlawful camping, okay? You can't camp out or sleep on sidewalks, underneath underpasses or bridges, and we've warned you about this before, okay? You've got a court date on November the 8th at 9 a.m. at the courthouse at 600 West Jefferson. If you fail to appear, judge may potentially issue a warrant, okay?
So there you go. There's the video, audio if you heard it. I'm going to recap everything we just saw, because I think it's important you fully understand everything you just saw in that. So officer walks up, pulls up on a pregnant woman who, for those of you who couldn't see, it was on like a random mattress that was just on the ground under an overpass. Like, where'd that mattress come from? I mean, obviously she didn't pull it there herself. It was like a queen size mattress too. And it was just laid out on the ground there. So she's out under an overpass, it looks like, outside on this mattress. And she proceeds to tell the officer that she is going into labor. And she's very obviously pregnant. So the officer calls an ambulance. She then attempts to leave, saying, don't even worry about it. She gets up, she walks away. He's like, don't worry about it, I'm okay. And she's clearly not okay. I'm okay, and walks away. Now, once again, pregnant women, especially a pregnant woman homeless on the streets, has so many resources available to her. So many that are available to her, and she either doesn't know about them, which is unlikely, or there's a reason she doesn't want to use them. Might be because of course, the fact she's using drugs. That might be it, not saying she is, but probably Because why aren't you using all these resources available to you? Homes and shelters and things, you can find it. So what this tells us that might be going through the officer's mind is that this woman cares about whatever her issues might be, whether it's drugs, mental health, etc. Maybe, I don't know, maybe she's too prideful to ask for help. Probably not, but, maybe that's it, etc. So she cares more about whatever her mental issues is than she cares about doing what's right for the baby. Because she's obviously very pregnant, saying she's in pain, saying she's going into labor. In fact, she gave birth to that baby later on that day. Imagine you're like in labor and an officer's coming up on you, calls an ambulance, you're in that much pain, and to avoid a illegal camping citation, you decide you're going to try to run away. Well, that isn't prioritizing anything properly at all, is it? So if you're the officer, you got a pregnant woman who's going into labor and trying to walk away. So he detains her. He says, no, you can't leave. You're being detained. Now, I'm not going to try to speak per se exactly what's for the officer, but I can tell you what I would be thinking if I'm that officer. How can I force you to wait for an ambulance? Okay? What can I do to make you stay put? Because you are very pregnant and you might be going into labor and you clearly need help. Now, of course, I can't make you seek medical treatment, but what I can do is detain you for unlawful camping until the ambulance arrives that then could take a look at you and potentially treat you. And if you do detain someone, you're in, kind of a little bit of a legally tricky situation. Because if you detain somebody and you decide, I'm not going to charge you for a crime or anything else, and it comes out you detain somebody to try to get them to receive medical treatment instead, you could be looking at possibly being in trouble for violating individual civil rights. Because, of course, people do have a right to refuse care. So he says, well, I'm going to detain you for unlawful camping. I have to issue the citation for it. But he wasn't trying to jam up some pregnant woman necessarily. He's trying to help her. That's why these laws were passed in the first place. These people that are living on the street need help. And they can't be left on their own devices to do it. Being left on their own devices has presented them to be on the street homeless in the first place. Now, of course, you can't force them to receive medical care. You can't necessarily force them to go into drug rehabs. You can't force them to go to the homeless shelter. But what you can do is say, look, you know what? I can't force you to do certain things, but I don't want your decisions to affect other people. I don't want it to affect other people's private property. I don't want it to affect this baby that's about to be born. I don't want it to affect whether it's even public property, making it unsafe for people to be in an area. Which leads to the question with that, what we just saw, what would the media have you do? What would these other people have him do? Let her walk away? While she's pregnant going into labor? Making bad decisions? Is that humane? There's nothing humane about letting a very pregnant woman going through labor stay on the street and run away from you because she's just simply, afraid of officers or whatever. That's not the humane thing to do either. So from the liberty aspect, you can look at it, and there's two ways to look at it, right? This is Adrienne Southworth recently gave an interview where she talked about ordered liberty. And to a degree here, you can make decisions as long as they don't affect other people. Well, we've got a baby that's a baby. I mean, literally it's 2 seconds from being born. You have private property rights at play. You have public use property where everybody's paid for it and you're using that property rights at play. Here, you've got some different competing interests. So she's damaging potentially 2 to 3 different other parties here. So you don't have the liberty to just trot all over other people, and including the unborn child. But the reason why there's so much pushback here on something that when you really start to think about it, he did the most humane thing he could for that child and also for that woman, because he issues her the citation. You can say, well, maybe he couldn't issue the citation, one of the civil rights argument, but also that might be the best thing for her, to see a judge shortly after she's given birth to the child, so the judge can maybe, make sure something crazy isn't going on. When she's in that quote-unquote system there, they can get her help. The judges, I'm sure, and especially because they're very liberal judges, look at these as not as opportunities to jam up people for unlawful camping, but rather to try to get them into the treatments they need and get them to the resources they need. So why are people so up in arms on it? Well, just look at how the media reported on this. This is from that same article that I pulled that video from you just saw. This is the quote here. They said, body camera video footage showing Stewart issuing an unlawful camping citation to a homeless woman who was in active labor and awaiting an ambulance. Now that makes it sound like the woman was sitting there on her nasty mattress, called an ambulance going into labor, and then the officer happened upon her. But that's not what happened. Clearly. She was trying to run away from him while in labor. Jeez. For all their so-called caring, they have cruelty instead. That's what they have for these people, is cruelty. And then you're attacking the officer. Probably saved that child and potentially that mother's life. Because she may have given birth out there on the street. And how does he get treated? Now wonder why nobody wants to be a police officer anymore when they get treated like this for helping people. Using the tools that they have. Well, y'all, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Thank you all so much for joining me. See you back here later this week. If I don't see you then, have a Merry Christmas.